So, when we last left off, Naomi was in the country of Moab, right? With her family. But what happened? Everybody started dying. That was very sad. So now we're left with 3 widows and 3 graves in the land of Moab. Very sad place in their life. So that was at the end of Ruth chapter 1, verse 5. So we're going to move on to verse 6 now. So then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. So it's been 10 years at this point they've been in the land of Moab, and now she receives word from back home. Not sure how she got it, whether someone traveled their way, but she's heard that now there's bread again, that's the reason they left, because there was a famine. They were starving because the Midianites kept attacking. So this is no doubt probably, like we talked about, after Gideon had probably set southern Israel free. So now they're able to grow crops again, because the Midians would come in and just eat everything and trample everything and destroy everything. So now they're able to grow crops again. So this is probably at that point when Gideon's done and things are growing again. So now she wants to head home. So her and her daughter-in-laws all get up to go head to Canaan, to Israel, right? So it's interesting. She's ready to go home now when there's bread. You wonder how long she sat there in Moab waiting to go home, but now she's ready to go. This is a lot like the prodigal son. He went away to go live his life and to live it up, to get his, to enjoy life. And then when did he want to come home? He was destitute, and she's probably destitute at this point. They went to Moab to gain food and to live life. They didn't stay with their people. They went and sought an easy way out, so to speak. So let's look at a couple of verses out of the prodigal son. Luke 15 through 19. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he set him into his fields to feed the swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So there's one difference we're going to see between the prodigal son and Naomi at this point. The prodigal son recognized his sin, and he desired to go home and confess to his father that sin, I said that backwards, that sin to his father, so that he might be blessed with bread to eat. And do you remember last time I talked about Abraham making the same mistake of leaving home, leaving the land of Canaan at that point, and he headed to Egypt to flee the famine that he was in? He wasn't supposed to have necessarily done that either. And along the way, he ended up having problems and sinning. And eventually, though, Abram realized he needed to go back home. God mercifully saved him out of a mess he got into in Egypt. And he went back home, and he went back to the altar where he used to worship, so he could basically confess and return to God and got back on track. The prodigal son made the mistake, goes home, confesses, gets back on track with his family and God. And the other person we mentioned was Jacob and Esau. You remember when Jacob ran away from Esau out of fear of Esau? He really wasn't supposed to have done that either. He made a big mistake and ran off too. But at a certain point, it was time to head home, and he stopped and wrestled with God along the way and got his act together and came back to God and returned home. But what are we seeing with Naomi at this point? She's just returning home for bread. She's doing the same thing her and her family did in the beginning. Left Israel so they could go find bread. Go to Moab where they weren't supposed to be at all. They weren't supposed to be mingled with the Moab people. Totally not. And then they intermarry. They're not supposed to have done that. So they've just gotten way off track. And now what she's doing, she's not recognizing or admitting her sin or the problems they caused. Instead, she's just seeking food again. She's just still taking care of self and not what's really happening. Warren Wiersbe, who wrote on this, he said, "How sad it is when people only hear about God's blessing but never experience it because they are not in the place where God can bless them. Whenever we have disobeyed the Lord and departed from his will, we must confess our sin and return to the place of blessing." So that's what Abraham did, that's what the prodigal son did, that's what Jacob did. But at this point, we're not quite seeing that with Naomi. She's just thinking about, how do I feed myself? That's all she's worried about. And so when we get into a place where we don't belong, just to meet our needs or live happily or enjoy life, we're way off track if God's not told us to be there. And we're not truly going to be blessed. Even though we think we're heading towards bread and we're going to be blessed, we're not going to really be blessed when we're not where we're supposed to be. So, so that's the one difference. Let's read Ruth 1:7. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her her two daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So they all get up and decide to go. Those girls didn't need to go, didn't have to go, but they must have really liked Naomi. She must have been a very good mother-in-law for them to decide to give up their homeland to go with her. But we see Naomi seems to be returning to Bethlehem for the blessing of bread, like I mentioned, but not necessarily returning for the relationship with God. There's no mention at this point of confessing her sin or worshiping at an altar like the prodigal son or Abraham or Jacob did. So they get on the road. I'll wait because that's a lot of them. This was your big one. It's like writing a novel, huh? Okay, so let's read what happens next. So, in Ruth 1:8-9, and Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each to your mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them and lifted up their voices and wept. So they're already on the road. Who knows how far they've gone? And she just suddenly stops and says, "You two should go home." It's like, you need to go find husbands. Go find some young men in your country. You know, they could have traveled 5 miles or 10 miles. Who knows how far they've gone? Like, oh, you guys should turn around and go back. And here they've been very supportive and going with her. Now, you have to ask, why would she suddenly stop and want them to turn around when she's lived with them all this time? They obviously all got along. Why did she want to send them home?
Doesn't it remind you of when you go walking along and a dog's following you? And you just keep, and you're like, turn up, go home. There's a big responsibility having those girls follow her. She has no way to support them. She has,
could be that.
To give to them.
It could be that. But they also could be a great big help to her because they're a lot younger than her, right?
Yeah, but they're Moabites, and you're going into an Israelite place.
Now you're getting closer to what I think.
Yeah,
so
not a good idea.
It's not really a good idea. So, I've mentioned that it doesn't look like she's repenting of her sin, right? So if you're dragging two Moabite women back into your home country where that is disallowed, do you think you might want to get rid of the evidence of your sin?
It's that dog.
Nobody wants, so she's still not ready, to me, she's still not ready to confess her sin and show the evidence of the sin. So you girls, you go back home. It's easier that way. You go back home. So Naomi's attempt to turn Orpah and Ruth back is most likely a cover-up for disobedience to God's laws. It's all that walking on a road. She got thinking, now wait a minute. This might get me in trouble. So what happens when we cover up our sin?
God's going to shine a big bright light on it.
You can't.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay covered up. There's a little bird that comes and tweets. There's
Big lights.
There's big lights. There's a lot of times it doesn't stay hidden. It comes out eventually, one way or another. And just even your heart.
Your sin will find you out.
Yeah. Proverbs 28:13 says, "He who covers his sins will not prosper, but whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy." So don't think that God doesn't know what you're doing. We think we can hide it from him too, unfortunately, and we can't. And we're not going to prosper. Yeah, Kaylee's the secretary, and Kim's having to be retrained.
No, you didn't.
So let's read the next verse. Another point in this verse, I should say. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you." Now, the translation of kindly, it's the Hebrew word hest. And it doesn't really do justice to what she's sort of praying a blessing over them, trying to encourage them along their way. And so she is praying this blessing over them. The word hest, it conveys a whole lot more than what our English word kindly is. It's like all the attributes of God. It's his mercy, his love, his kindness, his goodness, kind of like all rolled up in one. And she's blessing that upon them. She's wanting them to she's really wanting good for her daughters-in-law. She does love them. She cares about them. And it also has a connotation of, she knows she feels guilty or not worthy at this point in her life. And the person that usually uses this kind of wordings is asking God to bless these girls despite her behavior, her choices, her sins. It's like you just don't feel worthy to even ask God, and you don't think God would honor your request because you're in a place of sin. So she uses this terminology that she's basically in asking God, please bless them in this way with everything that you can give them, despite her. So it's despite Naomi's apparent fall from God's grace, she prays that Orpah and Ruth are blessed by God with his hest, that cute little word, or his love, mercy, grace, and kindness, goodness, etc. It's just like every good attribute of God rolled up in one. But we somehow simplified it with kindly. But how did the girls respond to Naomi? So in Ruth 1:10 it says, "And they said to her, 'Surely we will return to you to your people.'" They want to keep going. They still love her. They want to keep going. They're not worried about leaving behind their people, not worried about their husband possibilities. They want to go with their mother-in-law. They like her so much. Let's see. So they really did like their mother-in-law. They saw something in her that made them unafraid of the Hebrew people, Moab's enemies. I mean, they're enemy people, but they're still willing to go live amongst their enemy. But Naomi still wasn't ready to reveal her sin to her people back home. So twice now she's already begged them to go back home.
We don't have that on our thing.
Really?
No.
Well,
Oops. Yeah. I think she's not reviewing anything.
well, so sorry. Yes, you're right. It's missing. I wonder where it went.
We have your verses though.
You don't have your verses, but
Yeah.
Well,
It's,
you can choose to leave it off if you like.
I'm right.
we could do We could do a reprint later.
Yeah. It's like, where did that go? Well, I knew it was there. So it's up to you whether you want to write it down or not.
You know, and I don't know how really these women, because honestly, the Moabites didn't really want you to be marrying the Israelites either. So I don't know how welcome they're going to be, especially when the covering is gone. You know,
Yeah, the men are gone.
Coverings are gone.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have anybody to protect them. So they need, and you know, a woman that is a widow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for the Jews, they provide for their. But I don't know about the Moabites.
Yeah, I don't know either.
So I don't know that, you know.
They weren't a very nice group of
loving
people.
people.
But you never know.
So I don't know. That's what I was saying. I don't know, but I don't think either
Direction is this.
it was a good deal for
Right.
any of it at that point.
Not necessarily. So once again in verse 11, but Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go, for I too am old. I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they are grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me."
Yeah. See, there she's blaming God on this whole thing too.
So yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to bring up. She's got two girls that she's basically a witness to, because the Israelites were called to witness to the nations around them. That even included their enemies, the Moabites. And she has this great opportunity because they already love her. They already care about her, and she's being negative about God at this point. Well, she's
bitter.
Miss Bitter. She's Miss Bitter negative. She's upset, and this is also a hint as to where her thoughts are. She's blaming God for what happened to her husband and boys. So she's either knows that God did this to them, or she knows because of the sin that they all committed that the repercussions could be that serious. So for whatever reason, whether she's justified in the knowledge that God probably did allow their deaths, she shouldn't have said this way, especially to her daughters-in-law, you know, of all people. She should have tried to keep it a more positive spin on God instead of
just
being
the
so
truth
negative.
on God, that you know, God is good, and
Right.
in His infinite wisdom, this is where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
She didn't have to say it this way.
No.
Not a good witness, not a good testimony. But she's in a real bad place. When you're caught up in sin, caught up in grief, caught up in, you know, whatever, she's going through a lot of emotional turmoil inside, and we don't always control our tongues when we're in that condition, you know. And who knows, you know, how long they've even been without money at this point, or proper eating and fatigue and whatnot. Who knows what's gone on, but she's not in a good place. But it's a reminder to us, even when we're going through a trial and problems in our life, we need to be careful what we say to those around us. People are listening to us, especially with them. They're so close to her, that's her daughters-in-law. You are still supposed to be a witness, and how you respond to your trial and your tribulation, it speaks volumes to the people around you. If you're angry or bitter, or actually saying words of blaming God during your trial, that's not going to do anyone a bit of good. You're going to lose people. And Timothy, or Paul said to Timothy, "Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching." And we always talk about this verse a lot because we're supposed to be ready to witness, tell people the truth, share the word of God. But we don't think too much about the out of season words that are there. Naomi is in out of season right now. When we go through a trial, we're basically out of season because we don't feel like we can witness, or we don't feel like we're able to, or have the ability, that we're not in a good place. But even in those out of season times of our life, we're still supposed to try to be a good witness to those around us. Be positive about God. Talk about the good things God does for you. Look on the positive things of God. Don't be sitting there saying, God did all this to me. You know, he's being mean to me. You can't do that. It doesn't work good. So when we experience a trial in our life, we may feel we are out of season, or that it is not really the right time for us to witness. But we are still called to share our faith positively with others. Think on the good things. He's our hope, and he's what's getting us through our trials, so we need to share that with others.
I don't know, I don't necessarily think positive is really the answer, truthfully.
Well, yeah.
Whenever a wife, okay, so wife and a husband, the husband is always the head.
Mm-hmm.
So the decisions that he makes, they're on him.
Mm-hmm.
They do affect everybody else, but they're on him. So she's taking the blame because she's kind of juxtaposing the actual reality in that she went along, she did her part.
Right.
She I don't know if she talked to her husband and said, I don't know, you think this is
right, we weren't there.
Whatever, but she was subservient to her husband in that she said, okay, I'm going to follow you. This is you, you, God first, you, then me, and, the kids and all that kind of stuff. But the idea is that the truth that has to come out versus the positivity is the truth is that no matter what, God is still going. Obviously, they still have food to eat. They said they're walking on the road.
Right.
They still have, so it's not the positivity, it's the truth of what he says. He says what is true. He's going to provide everything that we need. Right?
That's what I mean by the positive side of it.
But I mean, it's more the truth of God and what he is and who he is, because his character is such. He doesn't have a positive character. He has a good and righteous character. So,
right, but I mean positive in the sense of you're not putting down God. You're not being.
It's definitely not a good idea.
You're being. You're talking well of God.
You're telling
positively about him.
This is what we did. We made this decision.
Right.
You reap what you sow.
Right.
We knew that we shouldn't be going here. When God, if we trusted God, he would provide, just like he did with Joseph, your last
right.
Joseph with his family, and what he did through Joseph once he got Joseph to the point where he was in a humble state of subservience to the Lord, that the Lord could trust him. So it's more that we have to rely on his character and who he said he was, and regardless of what, because that wasn't her decision.
No,
it was her husband's decision.
She could have nagged him to death.
Well, she could have nagged him, but she's still, we're supposed, you tell them, but they still make the decision. They're still the ones that make that decision.
Right.
So I think that because I hear that positive, there's a lot of positive things that you say that aren't even really involved in what God is going to do.
You have to be honest, you're right, because people will say that God's going to always fix everything. No.
No, he's not.
He's not always going to fix everything.
My mess because I made decisions that were against him.
But I'm just referring to positive in the sense of you're not being ugly about God. You're telling the truth that he's a good.
We're alive.
We're
good. Walking.
Right.
We have a place to go. We have options.
Right.
That's the truth, and and it is a positive thing.
Right.
And he is in control.
Right.
They're still alive.
They're still alive.
Why
at this
are
point.
they still alive and the other guys are dead?
Yeah. Well, they may have been the ones making most of the bad choices, But anyway, yeah. So 3 times she's now told them, go home. Go home. But they haven't, done that yet until this point. So watch, this is what happens in Ruth 1:14. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So Oprah.
That was a little Freudian slip.
That name just gets me every time. It's so hard. You're so used to saying Oprah. And I try to I train myself to, or I can't even talk tonight. I might as well just give it up.
No, it's just when you get around that word.
Mrs. O.
All right.
She's Ms. O now. Anyway, she's finally given up and now is going to go back. She, for whatever reason, decided she wasn't going to keep up with her commitment to go. And it's kind of sad because she's made this choice to go back, because she could have gained a relationship with God, you know, living amongst God's people, going that way, but now she's turned around and is going back to a very ungodly, evil people. They worship the god, I probably won't say it right, Shemish or Kamish, however they say it. See, she knows. Anyway, they worship this god that the people, if they really felt it necessary, they would wipe out a whole town and sacrifice to him. It was a human sacrifice god, and they literally would wipe out towns if the rulers thought it would help benefit their country, or their ruling, you know, whatever they were trying to accomplish. I mean, that's a really evil society to do that, and to submit to that, keep submitting to that. So she's giving up a chance to be with the true God to go back to this evil society, to this evil God. It's a sad place for her to make this choice. It's a lot of people get to this point where they're at that crossroad where they've got to make the choice. The scribe that talked to Jesus, he was at that crossroad. There were several people like that we read about in the Gospels, and he got right there up to the edge and he walked away. And you don't know what makes people make these choices. They get so close. And Jesus said this to say to the scribe. He says, now when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, I mean, he knew the right answer. He said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. You're so close. You're almost there. But the guy walks away, doesn't quite figure it out, or just makes the wrong choice, chooses what seems easier. When we're working with people, like here's Naomi could have been working with her daughter-in-law, she really shouldn't have been urging her to go back to such an evil place. Why would you want your daughter-in-law to go back to such an evil place? You don't ever want to get people this close and not help them try to cross the finish line, you know, to come to God. So we don't ever want to get people to the place where they are not far from the kingdom, but actually never entering it. You want them to enter it. Now, none of us are perfect, just like Jesus. He couldn't make that scribe make the right choice, but you do your best to encourage them. For me, I would think, let's take Orpah with me, you know, take her to a godly land, you know, instead of leaving her back where she could even get killed just because that's what their society believes. So, kind of a missed opportunity that Naomi had. So let's go back to verse 14. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. In our terminology, Ruth stuck like glue to her mother-in-law. She clung to her just tight. So Ruth clinging to Naomi demonstrate love's resolve. We talked about that as one of the categories of this book. She truly loved and cared for Naomi and would not turn back. She was quite determined. Nothing would change her mind. She was willing to forsake her family, her friends, her God, you know, her homeland, everything she knew, to go with Naomi to this strange place that she'd never been.
And that's the same decision that we have to make when we come to Christ.
Mm-hmm. You turn away from everything else.
Everything else. And I think that was the amazing thing about this woman. The difference between her and Orpah was that she truly saw the love of God in Naomi, regardless of what was happening.
Right.
Because she had consistently been that close to her, when the Orpah was not that close to her. So, you know, you can see that. And you see that in different people, you know, how they respond to just the idea of Christ. If you're just working in a religious system and you're working it, see, I work with a lot of guys and they're working it, so they're working it all the time. You're working the system. So when I talk to them about God, I have to ask them, who's your God? And it shakes them up. They're like, what do you mean? So if you truly love God, it's like Jesus. It's like He is everything to me, and that's what she said.
Yeah, she's chosen.
You know, it's like, this is it.
It
doesn't matter what you say. I'll follow you, whether you want me to go back or not. I'm going to continue to follow you. It's the same thing with us in Christ.
Right.
It's like no matter how hard it gets, you're going to pick up that cross
and go,
and you're going to follow Him.
Yeah.
So that's just so profound to me. I think that's what hit me so hard when I read this the first time.
Yeah, she's just totally loves her, totally has made the decision to commit and to go. Very much so. So Ruth 1:15 says, and she said, look, your sister-in-law, one more time. Naomi's just not getting this. And she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. And then she said, but Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people should be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. So Ruth's resolve to go with Naomi is expressed as a sevenfold decision statement. You might say it's a very complete decision, a statement that she's made. Very determined, very resolved. She says, I'll go where you go. I'll sleep where you sleep. Talk about dedication. Your people will be my people. She's just totally forsaking everything. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. That's 5 of them. I'll wait for you to catch up. Have you ever said this kind of commitment to anybody? It's quite a commitment.
Well, the covenant with Christ.
Right. That should be the way our commitment should be with Christ.
And with our husbands. Yeah.
And it should be that way with your husband. It should be that way with God. But I think a lot of people don't even get this when they commit to God. They don't quite get how serious your commitment is. And then this, where you are buried, I will be buried. A death oath if they should ever be separated. So in other words, if somebody tries to separate them, Ruth is basically threatening to kill herself. What a commitment. What a love. Only true love could give you that kind of resolve or commitment to do that. Oh, gone too far here. Is everybody caught up? Ruth 1:18. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. She just went silent. I guess I can't talk her out of this. When the word determined in the Hebrew language means that Naomi could really see how Ruth had strengthened herself to just, that's it. You're not going to convince me. She could see it in Ruth. She could see how determined she was. That resolve. She could see it in her. So just, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to ask you again. I've only done it multiple times. So let's read off this one. Now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And I just want to flip ahead. This is what they had to do. You see Moab's the purple. And they had to go up and around and down. They had to travel 75 miles.
Wow. By foot.
By foot.
In the desert.
It's hot. It's desert. Well, I assume it's hot. I would assume they would go a decent time of the year. But they had to go up 4,500 feet on foot and back down another 3,700 feet to get to Bethlehem.
In sandals.
In sandals. You hope they had sandals, right?
Yeah.
No good arch support. That's quite a journey that they had to take. Yeah. And not easy. For them, it's two women, one who's older. There's, who knows what kind of food supply. How are they carrying food? Or did they have any money? Where are you going to buy the food? Did they hunt their food? How did they do this journey?
Protection at night.
No protection at night. Wolves, whatever. Yeah, it's a dangerous journey. They have no men protecting them. No hotels to go stop in overnight. the camping alongside the road. It took them 9 to 10 days at least to get there. That's quite a journey, quite a trip. But going back. So now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem, and it happened when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" So they're kind of in shock. It's been 10 years. She's back. Is that Naomi? And who knows what kind of look she had on her face or how she looked. You don't.
Where are your boys?
Yeah, where, you know, that would throw you off too. You know how sometimes you recognize somebody because of the uniform they're in, you know, if they're out of their uniform, you don't recognize them sometimes, but it's been 10 years and who knows, maybe she's gone gray while they've been gone. They're in shock, you know, which, could that be her? And so she responds and says, "But she said to them, 'Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me.'" So she's renamed herself bitter, basically, because of the way she's feeling about everything. And she says, "I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty." So she's still putting it all on God. "And why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So she's now telling all her friends and family back home the same type of stuff. It's all God's fault. But in a sense, this is her, maybe in a way, almost a confession of what's gone on. It's kind of a roundabout way of her saying, there's a reason God did this to me, or did this to my family. And so this guilt-like statement in verse 21 almost appears to be Naomi's confession of sin. Because she seems to be indicating that she deserved all that she had suffered. Don't we feel that the guilt pours in on you when you know you've done some stuff you shouldn't have? And she's got some of the evidence standing right there beside her of what's gone on. But now she's back in the promised land of God where she belonged. And now maybe she's getting back on track with God. You know, maybe this statement is the first step. She now has to face reality because she's got Ruth with her. She doesn't have her family with her anymore. So now can't fight it anymore. She's going to have to deal with it and deal with God and, you know, take that step. So Ruth 1:22 says, "So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest." So they arrived back at barley harvest, and this may seem like a silly, unnecessary detail to us. You know, who cares that what the crop is that's coming in, you know? But every detail in the Bible is there for a reason. And this tells us it was about April. You know, every year is different depending on the weather, but it's about April when this is happening, when they got home. And the barley harvest usually happens around April, and this information will tie into the prophetic and typological emphasis found in the book of Ruth. We'll see that as we go through, why this time of year is important, why it's important to know this. So we'll get to that more as we go in the next coming weeks, okay? So next week we'll see how this barley harvest just helps Naomi and Ruth. We'll see what happens because of it.